Welcome to the Mobile Monger Podcast, where we go behind the scenes in the cheese world to chat with the people making, selling, or distributing your favorite specialty food products. I'm your host, Janae Muha, certified cheese professional, longtime cheesemonger, and producer advocate. Farming is a long and arduous career that many don't understand the full scope of. Caring for land and animals is a 24-hour job that only intensifies when human children are added to the mix. Arlene Hunter and Caite Palmer address this side of the farming world in their podcast, Barnyard Language, and they show me a snippet of the difficulties and joys of raising farm kids. From the traumas of childbirth to the stark differences between the US and Canadian farming structures, we tackle a few heavy topics while also reveling in the wonders of creating delicious food products.
So my name is Arlene Hunter, and I live on a dairy farm in Eastern Ontario, Canada. So I live here with my husband, who's the sixth generation on this piece of property, and our four kids who are 17, 15, 12, and 8. So we milk Holsteins, and that's our day-to-day lifestyle, milking cows.
I'm Caite Palmer. I live in far northeast Iowa with my husband and our two kids. Our kids are the fifth generation on this farm. They're 6 and almost 5, just 6 and almost 5. We raise beef cattle and sheep for meat. My husband and I both work full-time off farm as well, and Arlene and I co-host the Barnyard Language podcast, which is a ag parenting podcast.
Amazing. That's how I met you guys, was through that. And so I'm excited to hear more about that and also get some insight on, I want to talk about what it's like to be a parent in a farm, on a farm. So Arlene, I think we'll start with you and just, can you tell me a little bit about your farm? Like, how many cows are you milking? What do you do with that milk? What does the day-to-day look like on the farm?
Sure, yeah. So we, like I said, we're milking Holsteins, and we have a 80-stall tie stall barn here. So that means that the cows are tied during milking time and the people move to them. So we have 8 milkers on a track system, basically. So we don't have to carry the milkers, but they go in between each pair of cows. So we milk twice a day at this point. At another point in our career, we were milking 3 times a day, but we've scaled back down to the kind of more typical twice a day milking. So normally 80 cows milking, and then we raise all of our own replacements. So that means we're keeping basically all of the females. So we have usually in the barn around 180 total animals, from newborn calves to heifers, pregnant heifers, and then the dry cows who are in their rest period before they have their next calf. And we're on a whole year system where we live. So I know in some places they milk, everyone calves out at the same time, and they milk for a time and they have a dry period. But our goal is to have cows calving 365 days a year, or, as much as possible, at least all the way through the year, so that we have a regular milk supply at all times. And being in Canada, we actually have a supply management system for dairy, for cow dairy. Not if you were milking goats or sheep, that's different. But for us, we have to sell to the milk board, essentially, or for us, it's called Dairy Farmers of Ontario. So we buy quota or own quota, which gives us the right to ship a certain amount of milk. And that milk all goes into the same system. And then the Dairy Farmers of Ontario actually designate where it all goes. So most of the time, our milk is going to a cheese plant about an hour away, but it just depends on supply and demand on any given day. It can be shipped further, or there was a time where there was a chocolate factory, not all that far away. For some years, our milk was in Hershey chocolate until that place shut down. So just, it kind of depends. We don't always know where our milk is going to end up, but most of the all the fluid milk and a lot of the dairy products in Canada are all from within the country. So we don't actually process any of our own milk or make anything out of it, I guess. But it goes to, and could be in our local grocery store. I guess we just have to know that it's out there.
That's really cool. I have some friends in Canada, and they have definitely shown me how Canadians are dealing with their milk market, because it's a much different beast in the United States, and not nearly as they don't get any help from the government, really, like hardly at all, even
Yeah,
though everybody will tell you, oh, well, everything's subsidized in the United States. Okay, well, but not
right.
really.
And the thing is, it's a system that the government supports us on, but we aren't actually subsidized. So it's kind of interesting in that way. So the government gives us support in terms of creating high tariffs, which provides a barrier so that other people can't import cheap milk into our system. So that means that you can't send it in from the States. That's obviously going to be our main source, but you also can't bring in milk powder from New Zealand or from other countries. So the government gives us support in that way, but our price is actually based on the cost of production, which, is determined by averaging out, the cost of everyone across the province. And so it actually is equitable, and we're being paid for our product in a way that makes sense to us, but it actually doesn't require a subsidy beyond the fact that the government is interfering in the free market. So, I mean, some people have issues with that part, but I also think, there's lots of benefits in terms of being able to sustain an industry across the country rather than, a bunch of large farms producing all the milk, which happens in a lot of other places. It means a lot of smaller producers can make a product that they can actually get paid fairly for. And then we know how much we're allowed to produce. So, I mean, it does impact growth if there were people who wanted to expand their operations. That is difficult and expensive for sure. But it also allows those smaller family farms to support themselves and, to be spread out and support their communities in terms of spending and all that kind of stuff.
You said the key word, equitable. That is the
Yeah,
key word.
there's
Absolutely.
actually just recently, like over Christmas, there was a really bad snowstorm in a big chunk of the province, and a whole bunch of people had to dump milk because there were entire counties where they had to close the roads. So it meant that those producers who had to dump milk, they're spreading that cost to all of us. So while we didn't have to dump milk because the trucks were able to get here and they were able to get to processors, we take a bit of a cut because a bunch of people had to dispose of their product. They couldn't sell it, but it also, it spreads the risk, right? And, it was nobody's fault. It just happened. And so we all take a little bit of a price hit, but it means that those people who lost their product, they don't have to take all of that loss.
That's community care right there.
Yeah.
That's the ideal, I think. May not always be perfect, but whatever, it's best for everybody. So Katie, your life is very different on a meat farm. So tell me about that.
So I'm like looking out the window trying to count cows. We have about 15 cow calf pairs. So we have generally somewhere between 15 and 40 beef animals on the farm, because we have, cows and then young calves and then feeders that are getting ready to go to be processed. We raise predominantly Normandy beef. They're short, they're fat. You don't eat the bones. There's no reason for them to be taller. Um, they're good mothers. They do well on grass, and they're pretty. We also raise Katahdin hair sheep, so they're entirely for meat. They grow wool, but they shed it all out in the spring. We were direct marketing all of our meat until the pandemic hit, and we also had two very young children and doing 3 farmers markets a week plus restaurants plus wholesale with 2 very small kids. When it went from being able to book a locker date, 2 months in advance to literally, for a while, it was 2.5 years out. So people were booking locker dates for animals that were not conceived yet, let alone ready to process. Destroyed our business, which for us wasn't a big deal because we were backing out of it anyway because of the children, especially taking 2 little kids to farmers market. I don't know if anyone else has tried it, but it does not go well. And what I was paying for childcare was eating our profits. And I'd like to actually see my kids. We had them because we want to spend time with them. So that's kind of a thing. So now all of our animals go to the sale barn and go from there to get processed. We're looking at going back to doing some direct market, but only, quarters, halves, and whole animals, just because the selling by the pound is a great way to meet new customers, but it's 1 pound at a time, which the time commitment is very different than saying, here's a whole damn cow, enjoy. But there's still just a lot of red tape, and the sale barn is not our emotional ideal for how to deal with our animals, but it's convenient, and they write a check and you get a check right away, and it's easy. So that's that. And being in a free market economy, it seems like maybe we should just open the borders and let all the people who think that, a totally free market could live in one country and everybody else could live in the other country, and just split it up. Because, the folks who have a problem with the government interfering, I think, should be welcome to come here and try the race to the bottom, especially in the dairy industry, and try that out.
I'm just saying that I'm sure probably a lot of my listeners are going to be like, what, you have sheep and you don't milk them? Don't you know sheep milk is like the hot thing right now? Not that like I get meat sheep are not the same as dairy sheep, but still.
I have had to milk a few of ours to, tube feed lambs occasionally if things go poorly. And I'm assuming, like, the difference between beef cattle and dairy cattle, that the emotional stability of the animal is fairly different. Our sheep are not down with being milked. And they also, I know it's true in goats and cattle, so I'm going to assume it's true in sheep, that the size and shape of the teats is very different on a meat animal, where it has not been selected for ease of milking. So I know that sheep milk cheese is a big thing, but I don't see it becoming a thing here.
Yeah, I mean, fair enough. It's the idea of like consumers think that like, well, why don't we have as much sheep milk in the United States, like sheep milk cheeses, like most of what you get in the stores, Manchego, like your Spanish ones. But they don't realize the red tape that has been surrounding sheep milk in the United States for so long. One of the funniest things in my life I think I've ever seen was during the American Cheese Society's conference, and we were doing the award ceremony, and we had a half an hour presentation from the one and only John Greeley, who was talking about importing sheep semen, being able to for the first time since like the 90s, essentially. And first time I've ever seen an entire crowd erupt in applause and hoots and hollers over sheep semen. Like, it was wild, but insanely funny. And also just like, well, it is the crowd that I'm with. We do get excited about sheep semen being imported into the United States finally. So maybe we finally can have great sheep milk cheese being made. We're starting to, but it's an expensive and slow process.
Yeah. Semen is a hot topic in lots of different communities, and I know that Katie and I have both probably had many dinner table conversations that involved semen talk. Not sheep necessarily, but yeah, of the bovine variety.
For our family, at least, that's why we don't go nice places, because we will do things like talking about semen at the dinner table, even if we're out in public. And in our small town pizza parlor, nobody cares. But you go somewhere nicer, and it's kind of frowned upon to be talking about, semen at the dinner table generally.
Well, and I'm sure you guys get the magazines too of like, The semen
That'd be great.
magazines. I've only, had I've been to a few farms where they've had them, and I'm always like looking through them like, wow, they really gussied up these these cows to.
Yeah, plus all the merch, right? If you buy enough, then you got the hats and the coats with the Seaman Company logos, and that's usually like if we travel, that's how you pick out the other farmers, right? So like seed companies, semen companies, tractors,
Well, we're off to a
tract.
great start already
Yeah,
talking about semen. So,
yeah,
you know
yeah. We're
what?
good to go. Yeah, we're
It
getting
feels
comfortable.
like the same way I work for a subsidiary of Microsoft, and like all the tech bros, everything has the company name on it, and it's kind of the same for farmers. So as a tech bro who also farms, I don't think I own anything that doesn't have somebody else's name on it. But that's fine.
Most of my stuff is cheese swag. I mean, I literally have a cheese sweatshirt on right now, so there's
Of
that.
course.
I
Yeah.
have my company sweatshirt on,
Yeah.
so I get
we
that.
we do what we do.
Yep.
So y'all's podcast is about parenting and farming. So, let's talk about kids on the farm. Like, how many kids do y'all have? How do you manage that? I mean, we've already kind of touched on a little bit of that of like, how do you go to a farmer's market with two children? So how do you kind of like work that day to day of being a parent and a farm? And then Katie, you also have both of you are full-time jobs outside of farming plus two kids. So yeah, let's get into it. Let's talk about all of that.
Yeah, so I'll start again. So like I said in my intro, my kids are ranging from 17 to 8. So I will admit that I was working an off-farm job before I had kids. And when I had my first maternity leave, which in Canada was a year, um, I was like, well, I wasn't a farmer before, so I don't need to farm full time on my mat leave. And I also got a rude awakening, I suppose, in many ways. My first child was not the content baby that you could just pop in a car seat and take to a coffee shop or, bring with you to the barn and she would just sit there and sleep. I had a colicky crier who, for most of the first 2 years of her life, was not content with very much. So I was a stay-at-home parent, and my husband was a farmer for the first many years of our, you know, child raising years. I helped where I could, but my father, we're on the same property where my in-laws live, and my father-in-law, when we started out having children, was younger and was still farming full time. And we had employees that worked with us, so because I think it was probably easier for me because I didn't have a farming role before I had kids. And so, really working on the farm has been something that I've transitioned into more slowly as my kids have gotten older. So, our schedule right now looks like me getting up with my husband and milking in the morning, mostly before the kids are even awake. He gets up at 4, I get up at 4:30. We milk cows and do then all the cleanup tasks. And I'm usually back in the house after morning milking in that 7:30 range. So my older two are already up and probably have left to go to high school, and the younger two who still go to elementary school are maybe awake, or I maybe come in and wake them up. So the morning routine just looks like, lots of people get up and work out before their kids wake up. So I go and milk cows before my kids wake up, and they're in school during the day now. And then our afternoon schedule kind of depends a little bit on the time of year, and we now have older kids who have chores. So my daughter has a few afternoon shifts a week where she milks. She's the oldest. And then my 15-year-old has kind of a smaller job that he has to do every afternoon. So he goes to the barn every afternoon for 45 minutes to an hour or so. And then the elementary school age kids don't have daily chores at this point, just the way the school schedule works out. They don't get back until later in the day. And so, yeah, I mean, at this point, it's just everybody's kind of got their tasks, and it works. I mean, not to say that it's not busy, but um, yeah, it's farm life, in especially dairy farm life, is predictable in as much as it's not, right? So there's a lot of, everyday tasks that need to get done. There's lots of stuff that comes up too, but so yeah, you divide the work between a bunch of people and it gets done. So that kind of answers your
Yeah, no,
question, I
I'm just
think.
impressed that I mean, so many people will say teenagers are so difficult to deal with, but your teenagers are up and getting themselves ready for school and out the door on their own without you having to be there. And I think a lot of people would look at that and be like, I don't think my kids would do that. But it's a little different when they're kind of born into that life to a certain extent, I guess.
Yeah. And my 17-year-old actually, it's not, we also show animals a bit in the spring and summer months. So in the spring, or I guess starting kind of late spring, she will come out. She has kind of a show string of heifers that she has taken on. So she will go out and do a few of her heifer feeding chores before school in the morning. The rest of the year, they don't have to get up and do anything before school, thankfully. I know there are some farms where that's what needs to happen, but they don't have to do chores before school. But that, in some families is an expectation too.
Yeah. So Katie, how do you manage the littles and the farm?
Caffeine and no sleep. That's basically it.
Yeah.
We honestly, my husband and I were trying to think. I was 32 when we got married, so not old, but certainly older for the rural area. The average age of first marriage around here is like 23 or something. So, and we tried for almost 4 years to have kids, and it just wasn't happening. And so we gave up and started the adoption process. And in that process, like tripled the size of our sheep flock and contracted to go from, I think, 5 beef cows to the number that we currently have, and then got pregnant with our first kid like a week after we contracted for these cattle, which was also, I want to say I found out I was pregnant like 2 weeks before our first farmer's market, and then had two kids 16 months apart. So all of that was just full chaos at all times. And I was actually baking professionally when we started having kids, and quit working and stayed home because it wasn't enough money to pay for childcare. So because I work from home off farm, which is kind of a confusing thing, but I work remotely. I also get up at 4:30 most mornings and work for a few hours before the kids get up. And then my husband does the majority of the farming, which has been a really hard transition for me, just because I don't feel involved in anything. And then when I am included in decisions, I don't feel like I have any of the information I need to make a good decision because I'm not boots on the ground doing it. So it becomes sort of a weird thing, like, include me, but don't ask me to actually be included because I don't have the time or the bandwidth to actually participate. But don't leave me out of it either, which is a rough thing. And I was not anticipating the level of grief I found in not being involved in the farm. I remember the first lambing season after we had our daughter, she would have been 3 months old. And I remember standing, like every farmhouse, our kitchen sink looks out over the farmyard. It's just a thing, I guess. And I remember, standing there at the sink, and I was wearing her, and I'm washing dishes, and I'm watching everybody else is going out to the barn to, play with lambs, basically. And I'm just in the house with the baby. And I remember just standing there sobbing because everybody else's life just went on, and having a baby kind of stopped my life right there. And I mean, my kids are absolutely the best thing that has ever happened to me. They're absolutely the best thing in my life. But I think we don't give people any space to talk about the fact that the best thing in your life can also be the hardest thing in your life, and that it's not an either or, and that we're incredibly blessed to be raising our kids on the farm and with my in-laws right across the road, but it does come with all these other complications and never sleeping. So that's kind of.
I mean, I definitely think that I don't have kids myself, but I think that that is definitely something we need to give more space for, that dichotomy of like, yes, this child is what I want, but that doesn't mean it doesn't take away from the other things in my life that I also want. Because you are so tied to that child and for forever, but especially when they're little like that, they are just stuck to you, so you don't have another choice. So thank you for bringing that up.
Well, and I think more so for women, just culturally, this expectation that you're a terrible person if you have any level of grief or regret for giving up everything else in your life to have a baby.
Or a desire
Because
to have a
yeah,
both,
yes,
the kids
yes.
and the other life.
But I mean, for so many of us, we've put decades of work into our careers or our passions or whatever, and then no matter how much that baby is the best thing that's ever happened to you, and no matter how much you say, well, nothing will change, the baby will just come with me while I do X, Y, and Z, doesn't work. And, I think we need to give each other space for the fact that you can still be resentful of this tremendous change in your life, even if it is, 6 pounds of tiny screaming person. And there's a lot of gray areas in everything in life, and we need to give people space for that. So that's what that is.
Well, and your kids are probably getting up to the age where it's a little bit easier to kind of manage that stuff now. And Arlene, your kids are definitely a bit on the
Yeah, I've
teenagers
got,
do what they want.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, I've got that extra perspective and, like that whole the days are long and the years are short kind of idea, but, you do kind of forget, but when you're in it, yeah, it's all consuming. And it also doesn't leave room for, recovery, because so many, especially, I'm going to say it, especially in farming communities where you have that mentality of, yeah, strap the baby on your chest and just get back out and keep doing it. But that doesn't give room for birth injuries or C-section recovery or, the fact that, maybe your child can't be in a dusty environment. There's lots of reason why we need to give people time to recover. And that's both in terms of, regular jobs, non-egg jobs. I mean, like, don't want to go too full Canadian on you, but I mean, like, regulated and extended maternity leaves are not just vacations for women. They're times to, recover from a traumatic and difficult experience and to make sure that kids get raised and can grow up and be safe and healthy. So those things go together.
I think it's really important too to remember that even the easiest possible pregnancy and birth is still traumatic. I mean, you are making an entire person and then getting that person from inside your body to outside your body. And that's, I think we get to the point too that it's like you can only even kind of justify resting if you've had some like really dramatic, explosive, everybody almost died kind of birth. And even best case scenario, you're making a person, and that does take a real toll on you. And it's bullshit that we think that people should just, 3 days and then everything's back to normal, get your bikini back on and, your house better be spotless. And who cares if you haven't slept in months, Anyway.
It's the discourse around pregnancy, I mean, especially in the United States over the last couple of years, has just gotten so intense. And I think that people don't really take into account really how traumatic having a baby is, because not only is that child growing inside of you, but it's also taking your nutrients. So like you're going to have bone loss because of it. Like there's so many things entailed in just that. And this idea that like, oh, just get back to work, strap the baby on. Also, farming is incredibly dangerous for an adult, let alone a tiny, tiny thing. So, yeah, that's a whole other side of it. Like, yeah, you can strap the baby on, but what if that cow kicks you and the baby that's strapped onto you? Like, there's big equipment, there's so much involved in all of that. So it's also
Yeah,
the risk of like, how do
absolutely.
you manage? Like, yeah, I could strap the baby on, but do I want to put that baby in that position?
Yeah, exactly. Katie and I are just nodding our heads. Yep.
I think the other thing too, and I feel like something that we try to address on our show is that what if you don't want to? What if you don't want to try and strap this kid on and go out there and deal with this much more stress? What if you want to sit on the couch and cuddle your baby? That is enough. That is a job. And oh, and yeah, speaking of bone loss, I had great teeth until I had two kids, and now my teeth have just gone to shit. And I don't think we give people credit for the fact that like your internal organs completely rearrange themselves to make room for this kid. I mean, you're talking massive physical change. Best case scenario is massive physical change, and what the hormones do to your brain. Let's just, ugh, yeah.
Anyway, if you want more of this content, come listen to Barnyard
Yes,
Language.
we promise we do actually like our children. So
Well, that's the thing, is that the idea that we can't hold both of those realities at the same time, of like we can absolutely love something intensely and want nothing different in our life, but at the same time still desire other things. Like that's okay. There's plenty of things right now with like, the pandemic changed my life in so many ways, and it's not all bad, but it's not all good. And, having that, it's okay to have two thoughts at the same time.
Yep.
So what are some of your favorite things about having kids on the farm though? Let's let's talk about
Yeah,
the
so
good things of having the kids on the farm.
we covered all the hard stuff, or some of the hard stuff. Um, for me, it is really special to be living in a place where um, multiple generations of the same family have been able to live and grow up. And I live in a house that my husband's great grandfather built. Um, like I said, we live across the road from my in-laws, and so especially when the kids were little, there were times where I felt like my mother-in-law was as much of a parenting partner as my husband was. Some days, because we really do have a close relationship, and my kids know their grandparents so well and get to see them every day. And yeah, I mean, watching kids and baby calves together is pretty cute, and having opportunities to give them age appropriate responsibility, I think is good for all of us, right? I mean, I know sometimes in the house I have a harder time even giving up tasks than I think I do in the barn, because it's like, there, go sweep that thing, and it's never going to be perfect. It's just going to get dirty again. So yeah, go ahead and do that, right? Um, the house stuff, it's like, oh, let's just get it done once, and hopefully it's clean and over. But yeah, being able to have jobs that everybody can work at together. And like these days on Sunday afternoons, we have some part-time and staff, but no one else works on Sunday afternoons. So Sunday afternoon is family chore day, and so the six of us are on call for chores that day. Plus my father-in-law still feeds calves, so he's around as well. So yeah, it's nice to have things that we can work on together. And I mean, you talked about the pandemic, but I mean, it was great to have lots of space. we have we've got lots of acreage, and a creek runs through sections of the property, and we could go out and look for frogs, or get around. The older ones could drive the side by side around some of the fields, and just you know in a lot of ways, our day-to-day life didn't change all that much, minus the kids being out of school for months on end. But yeah, there were some days where we could actually forget that we were in lockdown because life wasn't a whole lot different.
I really appreciate how infrequently I have to tell my kids they can't do something. With the lockdown, especially, I have friends who live in the cities, and we're talking about, having a 3-year-old in a fifth floor walk up in New York during lockdown. And I'm like, I would have had to mail them somewhere if we had to do that. We have 300 acres. They can go outside and run in circles and scream as much as they want. And as long as they stay out of the road and don't, hit the electric fence, nothing's going to happen, and so they can just go be little wild creatures. And my kids are dirty basically 24/7, and they're very good at entertaining themselves. And watching my kids watch the adults in their lives and watching them learn by doing things is incredible. And my kids don't have any activities, which is great. We just stay home. I mean, my daughter's in 4-H. Both my kids are in school. It's not like we're, total hermits. But I imagine it for the families who are used to, going to the library and going to swimming lessons and dance classes and music and whatever else, that the pandemic was a lot more shocking than it was for those of us who just didn't go to daycare for a while, and it's a fairly quiet life. We're very lucky to live in a community that has a lot of diversity because we have a packing plant. So we sort of get the best of both worlds, which I love. And yeah, that my kids see their grandparents every day. And, we live in the house that my husband's great grandparents built. And it's special. And I think the best part about having little ones is that, people say little kids have more problems, but they're small problems. Where, Arlene's kids can drive. They're, dating. They're doing things that are actually scary. Where, we deal with a lot of drama at our house, but it's about Santa Claus and who picked the last TV show. There's a lot of drama, but none of it's as important as my kids think it is, which is nice.
I think that's the same for teenagers, though, really. It's just a different kind of drama, but it's still overinflated.
Yeah. We're not fighting over the color of the drinking glasses anymore, so that's something.
You both are on farms that are multiple generations owned, and succession planning is something that we've been talking a lot about in the cheese industry. We just in 2019 at our conference, we had an entire session with different cheesemakers who were talking about that. And Alice Birchenough, who is one of my favorite people in the world, is a cheesemaker in Alabama, and her response to succession planning was like, well, I'm just going to die. And everything comes with it. Like everything goes with that. So that is something that I'm thinking about with you guys being in the place that you are with multiple generations, but now having kids. Do you want to see your kids take over, or do you think that they will? I mean, I know, Katie, your kids are still pretty young, so it's kind of hard to say, but at 17, you can kind of start to see if that might be of interest. So what are your thoughts on the ideas of succession planning for your kids taking over or not taking over?
That's a hard one, and it feels like as soon as you have kids, the question is already there, right? Because I mean, you have just gone through, or hopefully are going through, succession planning with the other generation that's still around, right? So if this gives any indication, my 17-year-old got a heifer for her birthday this year. So she's definitely cow crazy. And she is applying to universities and has actually accepted a spot in the agricultural science program. So she's definitely interested in agriculture. At this point, she's saying that she wants to work off farm for a while first, which I think would be a fantastic opportunity. I know that's something my husband wishes he could have done. But when he did get away to university, that's where we actually met. But at that stage of his parents' life, they were he needed to come back. They couldn't manage without him. If he wasn't coming home, then there would have been different discussions would have had to been had. So we're in a place where she can do that. And if at the end of those years that coming back to the farm is something she still wants to do, I mean, that would be fantastic. And those are discussions that we can have later. But we've also been really clear about wanting her to know that she doesn't have to, that this is not something that we need her to do or that she should feel obligated to do, because this life is too hard to do just because you feel like you owe it to somebody else. You have to really want it. And at this point, she's the oldest, and then we've got 3 boys in a row. I wouldn't say that any of them are super interested. Time will tell. But I wouldn't. I would be surprised at this stage if any of them thought that farming was going to be part of their future. But I mean, you never know. Sometimes there's people who leave the farm for a decade and they're like, yeah, actually, I do want that life. So, I mean, it would be great if she did, but that's not it's not on my list of priorities. I can't speak for my husband. It's also easier for me to say because it's not my family farm. I did grow up on a farm, and my parents are no longer farming, and that piece of property has been sold. And in the bigger picture, the fact that they are both still with us and are healthy and happy and can pursue other things in their retirement is also a beautiful thing to see. So, I mean, I'm not tied to somebody having to work this piece of ground. Like I said, it's not my intergenerational legacy to maintain. So,
Right.
yeah, that's kind of and I will also say that my husband and I were in a very lucky position that his parents were open and willing to work with us and succession planning almost with my husband from the day he came home from university. And as soon as I was in the picture, they were always willing to have conversations and we have a really good working relationship, and we've had lots of open discussions about the finances and the legal side of things, and so we have a good plan in place, I think, and I hope that is fair to us and to them. And my husband's grandmother is still alive, and she's still involved in that process because the property was hers before that. So I mean, we have financial obligations to both my grandmother-in-law and to my in-laws for as long as they are here with us. So those are things that are also an added responsibility that the next generation, has to kind of keep in mind, I guess, that the obligation isn't just to the now, but to the other people who, if we want to retire, then we need to get paid somehow, right? so those are, succession planning in any industry is complicated, but especially when there's lots of moving parts and assets, living assets too.
I will say my kids are totally ready to take over now. They're quite sure they are. The current plan seems to be that our daughter is taking over this farm and our son is taking over the neighbor's farm down the hill. No word yet on what the neighbors think of this, but he's got it figured out. They also think that they're going to marry each other, so whatever. It has helped us a lot to talk about what our highest priority is for our family, and for us, our highest priority is to keep our family together and functional, because we know so many people where the family is just disintegrated over who's taking over and how that's happening and who's leaving and who's not. And so for us, keeping the family together is ranked above keeping the farm in the family, which is still ranked above keeping us operating the farm. I really want my kids to want to farm, but I want them to be happy more than I want them to want to farm. And it's hard because they're 4 and 6, so it's, it feels a little like demanding that they go to medical school or something at this point. Like, I can have whatever dreams for them I want, but that doesn't have jack to do with what they're actually going to do. But it is also really important to us that they do leave the farm and work for somebody besides us and go places and do things so that they're here because they want to be here and not because they had to. And it is, I think we're just in a very different place because our kids are so much younger.
So I'm hearing that the ideal is you want your kids to have that hallmark, go off to the big city, go to college, and then, come back home and meet their, the rom-com of the rom-com storyline.
Sure, yeah. Yeah, and then we can be the grandmas who look after the cute little babies when we want to.
Yeah. Realistically, in towns this small, they've probably already met the person they're going to marry if they're going to come home and do it. So,
you better find someone somewhere else and bring them home with them.
That's what I had to do. I mean, I grew up in a smallish, it's small. Like when I was growing up, it's like 10,000 people, which in some places that's big, but it's, I see Katie's face being like, that's huge. But for being 30 miles outside of Portland, it was small and we knew everybody. So I had to outsource. I had to move to Chicago for a while and bring a Midwestern man back to the West Coast. So do what you gotta do.
There's different Hallmark movies with different endings. So those are both a good option.
So one of the topics we've also been talking a lot in the cheese industry is about the consolidation of a lot of things. And this is not necessarily uniquely United States thing, but it very much is in a lot of ways, where our dairy farms are being consolidated because of Dean Foods and Walmart. And so a lot of these smaller family farms are just rife with, there's high suicide rates. There's so many issues going on with these smaller farms. I guess I'm just trying to poke at the question of how does that feel for you guys to be in this kind of smaller, not huge commodity size? Where does that fit in for you guys? What are your thoughts about that?
I guess like we discussed before, being in Canada, we do have that protection. And yet every time there are negotiations or, trade agreements get renegotiated, then that's scary, right? It's scary for all of us. And when they give away, even little bits of the market share, there's some went to Europe, there's a bit more allowed to be imported from some European countries now. And next time NAFTA comes up, all of those trade negotiation times are scary because milking 80 cows, we're actually the average size for the province we live in. And I know that that is not anywhere close to what it is in other places. But we know that that's artificially protected. And so it's definitely something that's always kind of underlying, what's how you feel, how safe you feel kind of in your industry is, we're doing well and we can, we're able to make our loan payments and support the debt that we have and all those types of things, make a living as a family on the farm, which I know is not the case in a lot of places. There's a farm our size in the US, I'm sure would not be able to have two people working full time. Having socialized medicine is also a part of that. I know that that's a reality that we don't have supplemental insurance for our family, and that's not as big of a risk for us. That means, we have to pay for our own dental and glasses. But beyond that, if one of my kids got sick or if my husband or I got sick, it wouldn't bankrupt us. So those types of factors are huge for us, and that kind of makes it possible for us to do what we're doing. So I need to recognize that Canadian privilege exists.
We're incredibly lucky that our farm is owned outright and has been sold generation to generation rather than inherited. So we carry an operating loan, for seed and fuel and things for the season until we get paid in the fall. but we don't have a mortgage for $1 million. We're not putting in robot milkers that are $1 million and change. My husband and his father collect old tractors, and we're small enough that they can run old tractors. So, for us to buy new equipment is maybe $5,000 for something like a skid loader, but we're not looking at $600,000 for a new combine. We're financially in a very fortunate place, just from that, because we don't have anybody breathing down our necks. I mean, the bank's going to want their operating loan back, but it's not, it's under $20,000, which is a lot of money, but it's not millions. We would not be able to support our family on what we currently make on the farm. I mean, there's a reason we both work off farm. Because I work in tech, we could afford for my husband to stay home, but he's too social, and neither of us would be happy with him being home all day.
That's a fair
It's
thing
scary.
to recognize, though,
Yeah.
that he shouldn't be home.
No, it would not be good for anybody. But the consolidation it's scary, and watching how many people we know who are not farming anymore, and watching the average age of American farmers keeps going up, and people keep saying, well, why aren't young people getting into it? But there are no small farms to buy. They've bulldozed the houses, and
Or they're
planted corn over
incredibly
it.
inaccessible by price, too.
Yeah. Yep. There's very few places to get town jobs that are, pay enough to support the farm. And honestly, it's bullshit that we all need town jobs to pay for our farms. To working to pay to work more is kind of messed up. But we're lacking the community support to do anything about the consolidation. I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean,
And how does
scary,
someone
and
how does someone who has a family with 2 full-time off farm workers with 2 kids and a farm, how do you have the time to do any sort of lobbying or any sort of political action that might have some sort of effect in your community? Like, where would the time even come from for something like that? And that is what also makes it incredibly hard, because there's not time for that, even though that's what's needed to start creating those systems here. But yeah, it's a big bummer, and we're watching it in farms. And then, like, the consolidation of distribution these days has been, I thought we would come out of the out of the pandemic with a better idea of keeping distribution closer to home, because that was what was able to flip so easily and be more nimble and adjust. But it seems like it's going the opposite route, and it's your Canadian privilege is showing, Arlene.
I know, I'm sorry. But even things like cooperative models, like that also requires time on the part of the people who are part of it. And like the potential of cooperatives is huge, because that does put power back into the hands of the people who are producing the thing, but it also requires more time and more, like then you're serving on boards, and you're having to, like, expand your market and hire people, do more things on top of, right, maybe a full-time job and an extra full-time job because you're farming and raising kids. Yeah, all of those things, right? I mean, there's potential in some of those types of models, but yeah, it requires even more work.
Yeah.
From the 2%, right? Or less, right? I think it's 2% in Canada. I think it's less in the US in terms of, like, the actual number of people who are farming. Is the people producing the food is a really small number anymore.
I think too, so much of it is that we have to prioritize the communal good over the personal good. But even if it is important to you, it's really hard to be super excited to give up things yourself for the communal good when nobody else is giving up things for the communal good. You know, it's hard to be super stoked about it. And yeah, I think a lot of us hoped that with the distribution issues and food price issues and that with the pandemic that people would understand it a little bit more. But it seems like as soon as it stopped being an immediate issue, people were just like, oh, that's fixed. Like, you guys, did we not notice how little it took to make this problem now? Like, it's, I don't know, it's scary.
That's the key right there, how little it took to make this problem, because it's not like, you know, a 2-week shutdown. A lot of places didn't. I mean, Seattle, we obviously shut down for longer than a lot of other places, but I can't imagine Iowa being too closed down for too long. Same with Florida. There's a lot of places that were just like, whatever, back at it. And it's so, you know, what, a month of stop caused so many issues. It's pretty wild. We don't really need to get into all of the pandemic issues because there's so many. So I am going to ask you guys some fun questions. This is kind of my quick round that I always ask everybody, and hopefully you have some answers, because I don't know how involved in cheese or how much you eat cheese on a regular basis. But
Daily. Let's just go there.
Okay, great. I like to hear that.
Yeah.
And the first question is, what is your current cheese crush? What cheese have you been just really going after these days?
So we were talking about sheep earlier, and we actually have some relatively new neighbors. They've just been here a couple of years who are milking sheep. And when we're talking about the sheep genetics, they want to expand but can't find enough sheep to buy, so they are working on that aspect. But we've had them over a few times, and they've brought some of their cheeses with them. They don't make the cheese themselves, but a small local cheese plant does. And so I don't even know the name of it, because it's like a custom product for that cheese store, but it's like a soft, like it's kind of like a brie type cheese with the raw sheep's milk that is delicious. So yeah, whenever it comes by, I claim that one.
Nice. What about you, Katie?
We have a local creamery called WW Homestead in Waukon, Iowa, that processes milk from near 2 dairy farms, and they make fresh cheese curds that are chef's kiss. We also have several friends who are cheese makers. So especially Lost Lake Creamery in Jewel, Iowa, they ship nationally. Just got my husband a gift subscription for Christmas.
Cheese of the month?
They do. Yeah, cheese of the month. Well, at least when it's cold out. Once it starts getting hot, shipping cheese is thumbs down around here. But they do seasonal grass-fed cow's milk cheeses that are really good. So.
Delightful. I love that. Going local. We love it. What is your favorite pairing? Like, how do you like to eat your cheese for the most part? Do you pair it with something? Do you eat it with salami, jam? What?
I have been on trying to find like the spiciest like pepper jellies, or like I found a spicy pineapple pepper jelly a while ago. So like that with a soft cheese, and then like, you know, the kind of cracker that doesn't really taste like anything but helps you get it into your mouth. Yeah.
Crackers are just really a vehicle. I mean,
yes,
let's be real.
Yeah. The crunch is good too, though. You know, like the combo is what you need.
I want to preface this by saying that I spent 20 years working in restaurants, and I used to be a real person who did things like eating cheese. Around here these days, macaroni. I'll tell you, if you have, those cheese curds that got forgotten in the back of the fridge and like they're still good, but they're not squeaky. You can take all the little bits and bobs of cheeses that you find and make some really good mac and cheese. I hate it, but I buy the like industrial size bag of pre-shredded cheese, which I'm sure is not actually cheese and is so covered in God knows what kind of starch. It doesn't melt. But our 4-year-old will literally just scoop a handful out and shove it in his mouth. And it's the most disgusting thing, but it makes him so happy. So That's
It's still a good
probably
snack.
Yeah, it's a good snack. And I am here for the cheese bin dump out mac and cheese. My niece's husband, still every time I see him on the holidays or whatever, he's like, "Can you make that mac and cheese again?" And I'm like, "I can't actually, because I don't
It's
even
never the
remember what
same.
cheeses were in that. I have no idea what was in that cheese, like in that mac and cheese, and it changes every time.
Yeah,
So
it's a different flavor profile, right?
yeah. So I'm here for the kitchen sink mac and cheese. Okay, last one. Do you have a personal cheese memory? It could be either a time that you were eating, or it could be food in general. It doesn't necessarily have to be cheese, but obviously this is a cheese podcast, so like, cheese is usually at the forefront. But just any food memory that like is kind of like top tier in your mind. It's like the place that you go to when you're like, wow, I just need a really delicious bite, or a time you were with a bunch of people eating really good food. Anything like that in your brain that sticks out?
Well, when I saw this question, the thing that I thought of was the summer after I graduated from university. I was going on a young farmers exchange to the UK, but before I started that, I did one of those bus tours of Europe. So it was like 10 countries in 10 days or something ridiculous, right? With a bunch of other like 19, 20, 21-year-olds. And so we were in Switzerland, and like the one night was like cheese fondue night. So I just remember being in this hall, and it was probably like not great quality, but yeah, just the experience of eating with all these people from around the world, because there were Aussies and people from New Zealand and North America, and all of these people who were all trekking around Europe for 10 days together, and just kind of that warm experience of warm cheese and hanging out with cool people.
It doesn't matter the quality of the fondue in that situation. It was the best tasting fondue you've ever had in your life.
Yeah,
That's
for sure.
the ambiance adds to the flavor.
Definitely.
Probably 15 years ago, I was traveling from Iowa to Pennsylvania to visit family. Took Amtrak, got stuck in Chicago overnight, and wandered down to Pastoral Cheese, which used to be in downtown Chicago. And the cheesemonger literally cut me 30 some samples, half bites of basically every cheese in your cabinet. And I dropped $25 probably. And I mean, it was at a point in my life that $25 was a sizable chunk of change. And she sold me probably like an ounce of a bunch of different cheeses. And it was amazing. I mean, amazing enough that I'm still thinking about it how many years later. And I was very, very sad to see that Pastoral has closed, at least downtown.
Yeah, it's closed entirely. But yes, I think that Pastoral is one of those places that if you were in Chicago, that would be your Chicago cheese memory, is going to Pastoral.
I think so much of it for me was that even having spent half my life in restaurants, so much artisan food can be very gatekeepy. And to have an experience where someone was so excited to share their knowledge, and to share that with someone who didn't have a huge budget, who wasn't going to, be a returning customer, was just such a delight to get to share excitement about something like that with someone that wasn't monetary.
As someone who was a cheesemonger for many, many, many years, that's the sign of a good cheesemonger right there. That's what we're looking for.
And I had a manchego with rosemary on the outside that I still think about. So that should tell you something about who I am. Like, jeez.
Is there anything that we didn't cover that you feel we should definitely make a point of saying, or?
I guess the one thing that I thought of when I think of people who are making cheese, and maybe, I'm guessing a lot of people are not actually raising the animals. Some are doing both, but there's a lot of people making cheese out of the product that we make. I just really appreciate the time and love that goes into the steps that they're going through to make their product. And I hope that they know that we are putting a lot of time and love into the part that's ours too. Like we are doing our best to look after our animals and to raise them so they can live long and healthy lives, and feeding them as best as we can, and all the things that we have control over, we're doing our best. So we appreciate what cheesemakers are doing with the product that we produce, and we hope that they know that we're doing our best too.
I think as someone who direct marketed for so long, the joy of getting to see where your product goes and to literally be feeding people and to be able to partner with food processors and folks who are doing value-added things, any of that it's incredible, and we appreciate it. And it's nice to see our hard work being appreciated and amplified more for the customer. So that's that.
Awesome. Well, thank you all so much for joining me, and everybody out there listening, go check out Barnyard Language if you want more ag and parenting chats, because they're talking about it. They're getting into it. So yeah, thank you all for joining me.
Thank you so much for having us.
Yeah, thanks for having us on.
Thank you, Arlene and Caite, for sharing your lives with us and for creating a space for other farm parents to know that they aren't alone. This podcast is recorded, produced, and edited by me, Janae Muha. Musical credits to my husband, Ben Muha. If you'd like to continue the conversation, find me on Instagram, Facebook, or Patreon. Thanks for listening, and remember to keep spreading the word of good curd.